Hello and welcome to a kooky corner of Iceland. Yes, I am not in my little abode. I am travelling again, and so I am using a studio space on the particular ship I'm working on, which is really nice. So I thought I would show you one of the little projects that I brought with me so that I could relax, just enjoy and have a little bit of stitching fun as well. So these are the pieces that I have been making, and you can have a go with whatever thread and whatever picture you want to do. I've chosen to do something really simple just because it is, well, it's a simple thing to do. You don't have to think too much about it, and it's relaxing. So it combines two of my favourite things. So we have, in the background, we have watercolour, and then on the top we've got some stitching. So we're stitching paper. Now this paper is a particular paper, and I'll show you when I go through the materials exactly the kind of paper it is. You've probably seen it before. You could probably also use very thick watercolour paper. That would work too. My suggestion is to check the paper with a needle and see how strong it's going to be to hold your particular stitching method. I have gone very simply with a back stitch and French knots, but you could try out whatever you want to try out, because it is quite forgiving and it is really a nice thick paper. Okay, so let's have a look what we're going to need. So for the background painting part, you are going to need some paper. Obviously, the paper I am using is a Khadi Paper. So it's a cotton rag paper, but it's specifically 320 GSM, so it's quite a thick paper. Your watercolour paper, your general watercolour paper, tends to be about 300 GSM. You can get a thicker version of this, but I think that might be a problem for the stitching into, for getting the needle through. But as I say, try what you've got. If you've got watercolour paper, try that, or a thicker kind of paper. I'd definitely go for something about 300 at the very least. You could try and be adventurous and see if you've got some thinner papers, see how that goes. But I think this tends to hold the water really nicely, and it's a good thickness for piercing into, which is what we're going to have to do later on. So that's the paper situation. You're going to need some brushes. I've got a couple of watercolour brushes here. This one is an Aquafine 12. It's quite a big one. It doesn't really matter what size, as long as you can get some paint onto your paper. It doesn't really matter. So I've also got this thinner one here, which is a 5. So that came with my pencil set. So I've got that as well. Paint wise, go with any watercolour paints you've got. I've just happened to have these core paints with me. I've got the high chroma paints, which are 6 different colour paints, but I've added a few more extras into here. So if I open this up, I just added a few extra ones out of my core set into there as well. But I love the high chroma because they mix really well and you can get some beautiful blends with them. So, and also I've got this little CSY art gallery, and it's a little tin box, and it's got some glitzy bits in it, which is quite nice to add into your background if you like that kind of thing, which I do, as you probably know. And I've also got these Gansai Tambi starry paints, which are like watercolour paint as well. So I've got a few different variations of gold there. That is optional. You don't have to add anything in like that. This is just for me. So those are what you're going to need for the background painting part. Really simple. Also, a glass of water. Okay, for the stitching part, no surprise that you're going to need some thread. I suggest kind of a thickish thread. You could go with stranded cotton. I would break that down to about 4 strands. So there's 6 strands in a length of it, so I'd take 2 out maybe and go with 4. You experiment, see what suits you the best. You might want to do a really delicate piece with 2 strands. You could use your Aurifil 12s, they work nicely. The cotton pearls work nicely as well. I did my black one with this black anchor cotton pearl thread. You can see I've got variation, different things in here. So that's an Aurifil 12 as well. That's quite nice. That's fairly delicate. So you probably want to go a little bit thicker than that, maybe, but it really is up to you. So just have a little piece to practice on, see what it looks like before you try it out. If we look at these ones, this one was done with that. So that's a black outline variation, and the green one was done with some stranded cotton, and I took that down to 4 strands for that one. So any cottons you've got, you can layer up. If you've just got the sewing thread, you could layer that up. You could do about 3 different lengths of that and put them all together through your needle. You know, it's really, really easy to layer up on those. As I say, use what you've got. So you'll need a needle for sewing and a needle for poking. You could use an awl, it might be a little bit too thick, so I tend to use a needle to poke the holes in, which I will show you in a moment. And then I've got a needle obviously for my thread. You could use the same needle, it doesn't really matter as long as you've got a needle and thread, and you're not going to be pulling your thread up and the knot at the back is going to be coming through. So that's something worth thinking about, but that is all in the future. Also optional, my favorite things, I like to add a bit of glitter on, and so my finishing bit when I finish the stitching and everything is to add in a little touch, a little tiny touch of one of these. So let's get cracking and I'll show you what we need to do. So I've got a piece of my paper here that I am going to use, and I will show you what we're going to try and achieve. It doesn't really matter. If you want to practice first to see what ideas you could put down before you go for your final piece, you know, just play around with layout of how you want your watercolour to look. I am going to go with a more subdued colour. I know, who is this woman? Because I've gone with kind of like a rainbowy background on both of those, but I want to take it down. I know, who am I? And let's get my core paints open. So I've got some paints on here, and I want to do some blues and teals. That's the plan anyway. So get your watercolour brush wet and start to just blob on some water in the centre of your piece. You don't want to cover the whole thing, you just want to kind of get a little bit of water going on in the middle so that we can start to add in our paint. So just water up, get some on my brush. I'm just going to start to drop it in. I'm going to let it do whatever it will. I might have a little bit of green in there as well, why not? But I'm going to try and keep it to the greeny blue tealy colours. Got a bit of cobalt blue going on there. Let's get some of that in too. I'm just going to let it drift around and do as it will. I might get some of this Payne's grey in there as well, why not? Take it down a little bit. You can move it around however you want it to go. Try and make it so that it will, so if you look at this one, I've made it so that my piece will sit in it. It can go out of it a little bit. This one did. You know, I've got a little bit extra there, and it really doesn't matter. It's how you want it to look. That's the important thing. So drop in some more colours here. I'll start to mix together and make other colours, which is nice. I've got a nice little line going down there, that's quite nice. I might take one up there just to balance it. You're looking for some kind of a little balanced piece. It's a little bit like when we did the blobber moles. You're kind of looking for just some kind of a composition going on. So just spend some time. If you want to have a go at practice and see what you like, what you want your piece to look like, then, you know, go ahead and try out different combinations of colours. If you're going for colours, try and go with maybe an analogous colour, or if you want to go bright rainbow, you know, like I do sometimes, then try and mix together primaries that are going to make a nice complementary or tertiary colour or secondary colour. So for instance, with these greens and blues, I wouldn't put in some orange because that would add in browns unless I wanted it to look earthy, in which case do. So I'm going to add a little bit in there just to get some more there. I don't want too wet a brush now, so I'm going to go with a bit more of this cobalt. As this dries, as is with all watercolour, it will get lighter. So if you find it's got too light when it dries off, you can go back in with more colour if you want to. It really is very forgiving. And just play around until you're happy with your background. So I'm quite happy with that. I think I'm going to leave that as is now. I might just balance it out at this end a little bit. I say I'm happy and then I just carry on playing. It's the way. Okay, so I've got my background and I'm going to leave that to dry. Also, if you haven't got any watercolours, another thing that you could try and use is some of these neo colours. You could do some neo colour 2s and wet it down. You could also use watercolour pencils, or you could put some marker pen onto a piece of plastic and then just use that as a watercolour. That will work equally as well. I would say not so much acrylic unless it's watered down. So if you water down acrylic, that would work. But you don't want to be poking holes into something that's going to crack and flake. So bear that in mind. Watercolours are good. It's a good go-to, and most people have got their hand on something that's watercolory. So yeah. Anyway, while we're waiting for the other one to dry, I'm going to show you what to do on this piece that I made earlier. Yes, Blue Peter. Now I have got a piece of foam here. And I would suggest, if you've got a piece of foam or something that you can put behind your piece, that will be the way to go. So I've got this here, and I've got a little clip that's going to hold that together. Now the reasoning behind this is you want to put some holes in on your piece. So this would be your piece. This is a piece I've chosen to do onto my piece. So you kind of see where you want it to go. And I'm going to use the one I've done previously just because I've got a bit of tape on there, a bit of sticky tape. So a bit of washi tape just to hold it in place while you get your holes in is an idea. Also, this clampy thing does help as well. I'm just going to make sure that's positioned in the place I want it to be. Looks like it is. Yeah. So I've got my foam. This is quite a thin packing foam, but I've folded it over a few times so that it will take the needle that I want to use. And don't try and do this on your knee. You don't want to be stabbing your knee. Okay, right, the next thing I'm going to need is my needle. So I'm going to grab the one that I'm using to poke the holes with, and following the lines, you want to try and poke a hole into each of the relevant parts, and also along the lines with a gap in between, and where that leaf joins, you're going to need to put a hole as well, so you know where it goes. So you're kind of about, I don't know, 1/2 centimetre apart. Make sure you've got all the things. Remember where you started. So I'm also going to do this. I'm just going to poke one hole there, because I will have this piece of paper for reference as I go along. And just putting all the markings in. I would say it's best to start with something simple, and you can build up your complexity when you've got a hang of how this all works. So let me take you down a bit further so you can see. This template's already got holes in it from where I previously used it, so you can reuse a template as well, which is good. You can do your own sketches. I would suggest you do them on a thinner paper, obviously, because it just makes it easier to transfer onto your painted paper. Now, just for the heck, I'm going to take my stitch holes right down this main stem. So they are going right down to the bottom there, making sure my paper is not moving. Get my last bit in right at the very end. That's where my piece is going to end. So I've done that leaf, and now I think I did that one as well. If you want to check, you can kind of just lift your work up, see where you are. Yes, I've done that leaf too. So this one, I'm just going to do the middle of where those berries are going to be. The join as well, it's very important to kind of get that in too, and then where it joins back into your main stem. So you're going to go around all of these pieces and just put in a little 1/2 centimetre dot all the way around the outline of your piece. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. I'm going to continue with this one, and I'll come back to you when I've finished. So I've done all my stem, but I've come back to you just to mention about these. Now, these little pieces here, I'm going to do as like a lazy daisy stitch, where I don't actually have to stitch into the whole, go around the whole thing. You can if you want to, but I'm going to do a little different stitch on these ones, just because. So for this instance, I'm just going to mark the point where my leaf is going to go to. I'm not going to go around the whole little leaf. I'm just going to mark that one point where I need to be mindful of where it's going to be. So in each of the ends of those leaves or petals, that's going in there like that. Right, I think I've got everything, so I should just have a little look. Yes. Now, in the centre of these ones, I've got 3 little dots. I have to make sure I've got those in there as well. Got them on that one, that's fine. And I've also got 3 little dots off to the side of this one, which I'm going to just put French knots in. So I'm going to make sure that they're on there as well. It's a really simple thing. If you've got a pattern that you want to repeat, I suggest you copy it. Make a few copies of the same thing. You can get quite a few goes out of your template if you look after it, but having a copy is always a handy thing to have if you're going to make quite a few. So you could do things like ferns and things for Christmas. You know, if you want to make your Christmas cards early, who knows? So you can just go with this. So this is all done now. I've got my little template there, and I'm going to just flip it over, keep it there, because if I need to check on anything, it can get quite confusing. So you can see all those dots there. So you just have to try and envision where your centre stem is, and I tend to start with that one because everything else comes along from it, so I keep this centre stem in mind. And what I'm going to do is a simple back stitch, so I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I've got my needle, I've gone with black just so it's easier for you to see. I'm just going to fold that over and keep that together. I usually have a little paper clip I can put on here, but I'm just going to go, actually that's a bit too heavy, I'll just wing it. Let's wing it. So I've got my needle, I have put a knot in one end of it, so just right on the very end there, and I have got a little reference sheet as well. That's another handy reason to have two of these at least. I'm going to start on my first stitch at the bottom. It can be a little fiddly to figure out where it is to start off with, but once you've got it, you've got it. And I'm just doing one stitch. Then I am going to go into the next stitch along and back. Simple back stitch, nothing too fancy, just to get going with our piece. And most of this is going to be back stitch. See if I can find it. If you can't find it from the front, go from the back, and it falls out again. It is quite a relaxing thing to do, as long as you can find your holes. So I'm just going to continue up this piece. As I say, just flip it over, find out where your next hole is. I'm making this look more difficult than it actually is. It really isn't that difficult. And into your next hole. So back stitch, back stitch, back stitch. Now I'm going to flip around a little bit because you don't want to sit and watch me stitch the whole of this thing. But yeah, keep looking at your references. You can kind of hold it up to the light as well to see where the holes are, and you can see the leaf shapes. But if you get really stuck, just flip your picture back and you can find out where you need to go next. You can see where the holes are, which is a really handy reason for leaving some tape on there. Obviously, the more complicated your piece is, the more difficult it is to see which line's where. So this bit comes in really handy for that. So I've got a piece there, holding a needle. If you find you've missed a dot as well, it's quite easy to add another one in. So if you've missed a little space, it's not a problem to use your needle and find that space again. Okay, so back stitch for most of this. So the leaves, the stem, the little stems going off, that little stem that goes up there. I was going to show you how these little lazy daisy leaves go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there and just take you to this part here. So I'm going up there where my other stemmy bit is. It joins on to the main stem there. Keep flipping it over. I'm not going to go too far up with this. I'm just going to take you to the point where we need to be, so that I can show you how those lazy daisy leaves go, or petals, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so we've got that first little bit there. I've got the stem that goes up to there, and I've got the 4 dots where the ends of these go. So I'm going to go in where my hole is there. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to put my needle where that first petal is there, she says, and it drops out again. You won't be flipping yours backwards and forwards like me, I'm sure. But that goes there, and then I make sure that my thread is over it, so that when I pull it, it's not twisted, that one's twisted. If it does get twisted, just take it out and put it back in. It's not a problem. So can you see that's formed that petal for me, so I don't have to do all the stitches. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another little hole just on the outside of that one, so that I can hold that stitch in place like that. So that's my first little petal there, and I'll do another one over the top of it there, one there and one there, so I've got that 4. And all those leaves I will do in that method. The only other thing you're going to need to know, if you want to do them, is the French knots. So I'm going to do those 3 French knots that are there. I'm just going to fasten this off at the back. The way I fasten it off, I just push it through a stitch, I wrap it round, pull it through until it makes a little knot, and then I can just snip that off. If you're unsure about any of your stitches when you have finished, then you can just put some masking tape over the back of them, and that will definitely hold them in place. So don't worry too much if you don't leave enough thread. Okay, so these 3 here, these are going to be French knots. So I'm going to start on this one. French knot. These can be a bit tricksy sometimes, you just have to be careful with them. So I'm wrapping it once, twice, and then I'm holding it down and going back in, holding that until the last, and that will give me a little knot. You can make your knots as big as you like, but they tend to get too bulky if you do more than, say, 2 or 3 rounds. So I've got one there, 1, 2, holding it down with my thumb, going back in and making sure it all goes together like that. If you do end up with a bit of a bobble, don't worry about it too much, just adds to the decoration of it. And the last one is here. I'm gonna go 1, 2, going back in, making sure that I'm holding on to that thread until the last minute. And I've got my little French knots, and I do French knots for the little berries on the end. So once you've done those bits, if I show you this one, I went in with a different colour just to add those on. You can do it however you like. Once you've finished your piece, as I say, you could put some masking tape over the back to make sure those stitches are all going to stay in place. They generally will, unless you've not tied them off with a little knot at the end, in which case just a little bit of masking tape keeps that down. Now, to finish your piece off, if you want to do a me, I add a little bit of glitz just because. So if you can see the shine on that, just adds a little bit of shiny interest. You could also do this in a metallic thread if you're feeling brave. It really is up to you, and you can play with this. You could do animals, you can do whatever you like. I would suggest, as I say, doing something really simple to start with. So I've got some glitter glue here. As I showed you, this is the Stickles, sorry, not sprinkles. This one's called Sunburst, so it's quite a nice one. You can do it 2 ways. You could add little dots on, just had dots of glitter hanging around on it. I might just put a couple on here just because that kind of adds in. So like that. I'm gonna just do that, and that just pads it down a little bit, so you've got some kind of a glitter that's not dimensional, but it just gives it a bit of sparkle. Now the reason we had the metallics, and I will go back in now that my piece is dried, and show you. I'm kind of back flipping now, so we're going backwards in time. So when your piece has dried, your watercolour piece, let me take you back out a little bit more. It's kind of dried, it's just a little bit damp. It's okay for what I want to do. So I'm going to get my metallic. And I've got a nice gold in this set. I do like gold. You could go silver. You could use something like that. I like the gold, so I'm just going to get that going a little bit. Try not to go into my other paint as well. And just add in some sprinkles. So you've loaded your brush up, some water and some paint. You're just tapping your brush just to get some little bits and bobs going on. Now if your paper is damp, it'll start to spread out a little bit like that. That's fine, because that'll leave a nice metallic-y bit in your piece. So that's going to dry again now. I'm going to leave that to dry, and I'll show you on this one. I don't know if you can see the bigger bits of shine in there. That is the gold that's settled down, and the bits on the outside there that are shiny, that is your gold or metallic-y watercolour. So there you go. You can sit and make whatever you like to your heart's content and combine painting and stitching together. And stitching in paper, it's such a lovely thing to do. Now with these, you can make them into greetings cards. You can make them smaller. You could have a smaller piece, so maybe half of that, and stick that on the front of a card. You could frame these up as gifts to give to people. Don't forget to put your signature on the bottom there as well. Very important. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will be back here soon with something else. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying what we're doing here on the channel, and you'll get a notification every time I put up a new video. If you click the bell, it will send you a little notification to say I've uploaded a video, so you'll not miss anything. Anyway, that's enough from me. Have a great rest of your week, and I will speak to you and see you very soon. Bye for now.